Distinguished Admiral, who is our chief guest and inaugurator of this seminar, Professor Mohanan Pillai, with whose arrival the think tank numbers have multiplied 100%. There was only the Kerala International Center, which was set up in 2007. And we have been engaged in activities which are familiar to you, particularly the front row, the intellectual capital of India, the Jawaharlal Nehru University. So it is very rarely that we get an opportunity to get them here. And I'm glad that with the ISDA having become very active. In fact, ISDA has been here even before the Kerala International Center. President Rajendran Nair for several years has been engaged in preparation activities, etc. So we are very happy to join in with ISDA to organize this conference. It's a welcome change from what we are doing these days. In the last few weeks, I have been to several international conferences, particularly a very interesting forum of think tanks, which was held in the Nalanda University just a few weeks ago. So wherever you go, the preoccupation is only one person, not one idea. It's always President Trump. So every statement, every intellectual discourse is now dominated by what President Trump will do in the next 3 years he has got. So the focus is now entirely on the United States and how he is going to reshape the global order. There have been several steps that he has taken, each one of them more disturbing than the other. So I'm sure our intellectual capital is now being spent on how the world will shape in the future and what would be India's role there and what will happen to India-US relations, etc. So we can forget that for a while and then concentrate today on the maritime matters, which is a welcome change, I would say. In the thinking of the Ministry of External Affairs, whenever we talk about a seminar in Kerala, they always say, have a maritime session. They somehow think that we are lost in the seas in Indian Ocean. And so they don't seem to think that any other subject is worth considering in Kerala. But this is fair, because when you talk of maritime life and the importance of the seas, Kerala comes up, particularly Kochi. In fact, in Kochi we have a very effective, very active think tank. And they organized a similar one in Kochi last year. So we seem to have this responsibility of understanding the importance of maritime zone and also the history of our maritime activities, particularly centered around Cochin. So we certainly have a tremendous amount of experience. And we also have discovered that we have better neighbors when there is a sea between us. Neighbors without a sea between us have not been very friendly to us. But once we move into the sea and go towards the Gulf, then we have a warmth which is extraordinary. And so, in a way, if you look at India's neighborhood, we feel much more encouraged when we deal with the countries in the Gulf and others who have been part of the India zone as it is. And meanwhile, our own land neighborhood continues to be on fire all the time. So these are the two reasons why I think it will be encouraging and engaging for us to think in terms of the sea and what it offers. As of now, I have not heard President Trump engaging the situation in the seas in our part. He has been busy elsewhere. But that will also come, because when a world order is being reorganized, even creating a competing United Nations as the board of peace, we are on the threshold of a big change. I'm sure all of you read or heard the Canadian Prime Minister's speech at Davos, where he talked about not a transformation, but a rupture in the world order. This is something very significant. And he spoke about how the middle powers, as he calls them, have to be more active. Because cooperation with the United States and integration with the United States economy that Canada had worked on for many years, he says that period is over. So we need to, he spoke about the need for strategic autonomy, not entirely in the sense of what we consider to be strategic autonomy, which is another name for non-alignment as we are concerned. But he was talking about strategic autonomy in resources. Interdependence with the United States should be a thing of the past. And therefore, when you are looking for resources and you have strategic autonomy, that is when the oceans become very important. And of course, the oceans have their dangers, as Professor Mohan Pillai told us. But it also has such untapped resources that it's quite possible that the shift will take place into the oceans and the maritime area. So I expect that will happen now, because there is so much of difficulty in dealing with the existing world structure. To me, the most important thing is happening is the divide between the European Union and the United States. That seems to be the biggest change that is taking place, because they are thinking in terms of having a conflict because of Greenland. It's unthinkable that United States would take an action against a fellow NATO member. And that is the only issue on which President Trump has so far retracted. In fact, he had said that he will impose tariff on 8 European nations who were not inclined to make any concession on Greenland. But I think it's moving towards an understanding, because everyone seems to believe that military action is not possible in that context. But even the fact that such a divide is taking place, especially when NATO is under threat of what is happening in Ukraine and otherwise. So I expect a turn of attention to the seas, because everything else is there, and we all know that unknown to the rest of the world, China has been, monopolizing all the rare earths and others in Africa, unknown to many of us. And that is the way the United States itself is forced to deal with China, because these rare earth resources are already monopolized by them. And this will be another reason why, for our own resources, the other countries who would need to develop these, we may have to turn to the oceans. Because there was a time when I was in the UN, our main principle that we put forward was foreign influence or foreign interference in the Indian Ocean is taboo. We had this whole principle of Indian Ocean as a zone of peace. And that meant that we did not want foreign operations in the Indian Ocean area. Of course, the major maritime countries never accepted that, and therefore that zone, which was of course centered around Sri Lanka, we virtually abandoned it. And now we are talking about more of cooperation. We welcome foreign presence in the Indian Ocean for productive purposes. And therefore, there is also a different orientation for us when we look at the Indian Ocean. It's not practical for us to keep the Indian Ocean free of foreign forces as we had imagined at one time. And we focused on it quite a bit. But now it is changed, and we are looking for cooperation among the maritime powers in the Indian Ocean. And that gives us a kind of leadership in this particular journey towards the ocean. And therefore, as I said, even though what we are discussing will certainly be connected with the new world order which is emerging, at the same time, there is an opportunity to relate it to the oceans and see what we can do in order to strengthen the cooperation with the big powers. And therefore, this middle powers concept, just as we have the global south concept, so Canada is now talking about the middle powers who have to be strategically autonomous in terms of resources. So I see this, of course, I'm sure we have bigger scholars than me to talk about these subjects. But we should concentrate, I believe, on this new use of the oceans in the context of the new world order which is emerging. In my view, the most dangerous thing that is happening is what is called the Board of Peace. This is meant to be an alternative to the United Nations almost. What is this Board of Peace? Somebody said it B-O-R-R-E-D, Board of Peace. But certainly, President Donald Trump is developing a concept of dominating the world rather than cooperating with it. And therefore, he probably thinks that this new alternative to the United Nations, as it were. Because the danger took place when the Security Council adopted that resolution. And that was a big surprise to me that it was adopted. And at that time, they had several guardrails. If you read that Security Council resolution, even though it talks of some kind of a handing over of the charge to this Board of Peace, there are several guardrails established in that resolution. But President Trump does not seem to take any notice of it. He's thinking of himself as the chairman of the Board of Peace for life, or at least till he gets his proper Nobel Prize. Now he has a fake Nobel Prize. Machado's Nobel Prize is in the White House now. So still he gets his Nobel Prize, I think he'll look. This is the most dangerous thing according to me. Because the United Nations may have been ineffective. It may not have been effective in various ways. But United Nations remains the only universal body in the world. It is the conscience of mankind. So however much it may have failed, we have a responsibility to keep the United Nations going. And this is definitely a negative development that we see. And therefore, in all this context, I think it is very appropriate that ISDA thought in terms of having this seminar. And the International Center is very happily cooperating with it. So let me, on behalf of the organizing committee, welcome all of you to this meeting. And we hope at the end of the day, we will have some sound advice to give to the world and to ourselves as we look at the maritime zone. Thank you very much.